To the House of Commons and talk to Andy McDonald, Shadow Transport Secretary, Labour MP for Middlesbrough. Andy, very good evening. I don't know if you just heard what I said about Joe Swinson there, but the government have said they're going to introduce a one-line bill tomorrow. They're not going to reintroduce the withdrawal agreement bill. And under those circumstances, can you support a general election in a vote tomorrow?
Well, let's see what it says, Ian. We'll look at the bill in all its detail, and we might want to look at that. But I caution against elections in December. I'm quite frankly, I'm quite fearful about this, because if we get into the depths of winter, it's not a good time. And of course, you and I both know that in university towns and cities, a lot of students will have returned, and they were disenfranchised in 2016. A lot of them would have wanted to vote. Are they going to be disenfranchised?
Well, they
again?
Won't be disenfranchised. So they've got.
They
four,
will. Ian.
No, they won't, because they've got 4 weeks to make sure they're on the electoral roll wherever they live. Oh, come on! What about individual responsibility? Surely people have a responsibility to make sure they're on the electoral roll. It's easy. Just go on the internet and do it.
Ian, just let's have a bit of sense here. We know how this works, and the whole Tory mantra has been about putting blocks in the way of disenfranchising people. We've got all sorts of wheezes and plans so that people don't vote. And this is another one. It's a really bad day, I think, in terms of their attitude towards these things.
Be sensible.
But hey, look, I've made up. No, you be sensible.
If you
it is absolutely
all you
ridiculous
have to do,
to do
Andy,
this.
is to go onto the internet and spend 2 minutes registering in your home constituency if you're not going to be where you are at university.
You and I were at higher education. Hang on, and you and I were at higher education, weren't you? You're breaking up for Christmas. There are other things going on. How many people do you think will religiously do that? Come on, you be sensible. You tell me what proportion of students are going to do that. A lot are going to fall away, and let's get that understood. That's obvious. It's going to happen, Ian.
Not at all. If you're so feckless that you can't be bothered to register to vote, then I'm sorry, that is your fault as an individual.
Do you know, I think we've given young people enough of a hard time without you calling them feckless. Oh. I think, come on, let's just back off a little bit here.
You were basically admitting they were if they weren't going to be bothered to register to vote.
Absolutely not.
I think they've got a bit more about them than you do.
And so the next step is everybody turn up with a driving licence, a photo ID or a passport, and a lot of people don't have them. You're going to disenfranchise them as well. Come on, Ian. We know what the game is. We've been around the block enough. We know exactly what's going on here.
In the same way that your own Labour Party doesn't permit people into Labour Party selection meetings without photo ID. Is that what you mean?
They're not electing their government, are they?
No, they're electing their MP,
they're not
or
electing
their
their
candidate.
government. Yeah, and
I mean, it's such hypocrisy, I'm afraid, Andy.
Oh, well, move on. Yeah.
Well, let's move on. When do you want an election then? If it's not in December, when do you want one?
Well, as soon as possible, but not. I think there are dangers in that. I'll tell you what I wanted to do, Ian. Boris Johnson, he'd illegally prorogued Parliament. He'd got his second reading through, and he abandoned that. He's abandoned his Queen's speech. We should have been talking about those key issues, about the trapdoor to keep that no deal Brexit.
And if you had voted for the programme motion, we could have done.
In 48 hours, the most important bill, Ian, that anybody here will ever deal with, and you want it to be rushed through. As Carl Turner said, he and his wife spent more time looking for a sofa than he proposed dealing with this bill. Let's deal with it with the seriousness that it deserves. And ultimately, we're talking about a border down the Irish Sea, and you and I have been around enough to know what that leads to. We know that he is playing with fire, and if that leads to what the DUP warned about, be it on his own head, but we'll be living with the consequences of that. That's why we should have been going through this in committee stage and at the third reading. I mean, he won his vote. What was the matter with the man? I just don't understand his logic at all. You win your second reading and they say, I'm pulling it. But what on earth is going on?
You don't want a no-deal Brexit, that's quite clear. You don't want this deal. You don't want an election. What do you want?
We want, well, as we go through that bill, we do want an election. That's not right. But we want to get this done. We want the no deal off the table. I'm terrified of the consequences of a bad deal or a no deal for my northeast region. I've got a chemicals and process industry with 32,000 people there. If we're broken from Amsterdam, Rotterdam and Antwerp, that whole chain goes down the tubes. And you've heard from Gianna De Fucci, the managing director of Nissan. You heard what he said. 10% tariffs on those vehicles absolutely scuppers his entire operation, not for the UK, but for all of Europe. And the same applies for Toyota and the rest, and they won't stay. And we'll have mass unemployment. That's what's going to come from this.
But if you agreed an election now, you could have a Labour Prime Minister in office on December the 13th who could stop all of this. And then at least we would know one way or the other, wouldn't we?
We certainly would. So if an election is absolutely on its way, we will embrace that wholeheartedly, because we have got proposals opposite the climate change emergency to deal with the issues of inequality and rampant poverty in our society that's been inflicted by the Tories since 2010 in league with the Liberal Democrats in the first instance, and it's got worse and worse, and people are suffering in communities like mine, and I can't wait to get rid of the Tories and get some sense brought back to our country, because the people need it. So when the election happens, rest assured the Labour Party are going to be absolutely ready to take our manifesto out there and get the message of a more hopeful future for our country, because at the moment this lot are sending us down the tubes.